I was sitting on my dock at 7 in the morning, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise paint Lake Kioe orange and pink, when I saw the third boat pull up to what looked like a freshly installed dock section jutting out from the shoreline about 200 feet from my property line. The couple on the boat started unloading fishing gear like they owned the place, and that's when I noticed the small wooden sign that read, Waterford Hills HOA Slip 7. My name is Zachary Ellis, and I've owned this property in South Carolina for 15 years. When I bought it, the whole appeal was the private waterfront. My deed explicitly stated that I owned not just the land, but the water rights extending 300 feet from my shoreline. It was one of those rare grandfather clauses from when the original property was surveyed back in the 1940s, before Lake Kioe was even fully developed. I paid extra for that privilege, and now someone was apparently selling access to my water. I set down my coffee and walked along my dock toward the neighboring section. The couple saw me approaching and waved cheerfully. They looked to be in their 60s, already setting up their rods. "Morning," I called out. "I hate to be that guy, but you know who installed this dock?" The man smiled broadly. "The HOA just finished it last week. We bought this boat slip at the community meeting. Best investment we've made since moving to Waterford Hills. Direct lake access without having to own waterfront property." My stomach dropped. The Waterford Hills HOA. "That's right," the woman chimed in. "Sharon Patterson organized the whole thing. She's the HOA president. Said they were developing unused water access to increase property values in the neighborhood." I felt my jaw clench. Sharon Patterson. Of course it was Sharon. She'd been trying to get me to join the HOA since I moved here, despite the fact that my property predated the development by decades, and I was explicitly exempt from HOA jurisdiction. I told her no at least 50 times over the years. "This water is private," I said, keeping my voice level. "It's part of my property." The couple exchanged uncomfortable glances. "That can't be right," the man said. "We paid $15,000 for this slip. Sharon showed us all the permits." "I'm sorry you're out that money, but this is definitely my water. Check your paperwork." "Better yet, have your lawyer check your paperwork." I pulled out my phone and took several photos of the dock, the sign, and their boat. "I'm not trying to ruin your morning, but you should know that you've been sold something that wasn't the HOA's to sell." I turned and walked back to my house, my peaceful morning completely destroyed. Inside, I went straight to my office and pulled out the property survey and deed from my filing cabinet. I'd reviewed these documents 100 times over the years, but I needed to be absolutely certain before I started a war with the HOA. There it was, clear as day. The property line extended from the shore markers, encompassing the water 300 feet out. The surveyor's notes specifically mentioned the water rights as a unique feature of the grandfathered property. I took photos of every relevant page, then called my attorney, Marcus Webb. Marcus had handled my real estate transactions for years and knew my property situation intimately. His secretary put me through immediately. "Zachary, what's happening? It's barely 8 in the morning. The Waterford Hills HOA installed docks on my water and is selling boat slips. I just talked to a couple who paid 15 grand for access to my private property." There was a long pause. "You're joking." "I wish I was. I've got photos of everything. There's at least one dock section with multiple slips, maybe more that I haven't seen yet." "Don't touch anything," Marcus said. "Don't remove the docks. Don't block access. Nothing that could be construed as you taking matters into your own hands. I need you to document everything, find out how many slips they've sold, and get me copies of any sales materials they've distributed. I'm going to draft a cease and desist letter this morning. This is serious, Zachary. If they're selling property rights they don't own, that's fraud. How soon can you get the letter out? I'll have it hand-delivered to the HOA president by this afternoon. In the meantime, be visible. Walk your property line. Take more photos, but don't be confrontational. If anyone asks, just tell them you're consulting with your attorney. I spent the next 2 hours walking the shoreline of my property. What I found made my blood pressure spike. There weren't just 1 or 2 dock sections. There were 8 separate platforms, each with signs indicating slip numbers from 1 through 24. Some already had boats moored. Some were empty, but had clearly been sold based on the numbered markers and small storage boxes with padlocks. At $15,000 per slip, Sharon Patterson and the HOA had potentially collected $360,000 selling access to property they didn't own. The scope of this was staggering. I documented everything meticulously. Photos from multiple angles, GPS coordinates, measurements from my established property markers. I even used a drone I kept for inspecting my roof to get aerial footage showing the full extent of the dock installations in relation to my property boundaries. By noon, I'd compiled a comprehensive file. I was uploading everything to Marcus when I heard a car pull into my driveway. Through the window, I saw a silver Mercedes SUV park behind my truck. A woman in her mid-50s emerged, wearing white capri pants and a turquoise blouse, her blonde hair styled in that particular way that screamed, "I'd like to speak to the manager." Sharon Patterson had come to me. I met her at the door before she could ring the bell. "Zachary," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "We need to talk about this morning's incident." "There was no incident. I informed your slip buyers that they are on my private property." Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes hardened. "Now, let's be reasonable. That water has been unused for years. The community development plan clearly shows that shoreline access is shared among residents for the improvement of property values. You're being selfish by trying to monopolize a natural resource." "Sharon, this isn't a debate. I own the water rights. I have the deed and survey to prove it. You've sold access to property that isn't yours." "I've done no such thing," she snapped, the sweet tone evaporating. "The HOA board consulted with our attorney, and we have every right to develop community amenities. Your supposed water rights are an outdated technicality that wouldn't hold up in modern court." "Then I guess we'll find out in court," I said. "My attorney is sending you a cease and desist letter today. I want those docks removed and every slip buyer refunded." Sharon's face flushed red. "You can't do this. Do you have any idea how much money and effort went into this project? We've sold 23 of the 24 slips. The community is thrilled. You're going to make yourself the most hated person in Waterford Hills." "I don't live in Waterford Hills. I live on my property that existed long before your development. You should have checked the property records before you started selling." "This isn't over," she hissed. "The HOA has resources, Zachary. We have a legal fund specifically for dealing with difficult property owners. We will fight you on this. That's your choice. But in the meantime, those docks are trespassing on my property, and every person you've sold a slip to has a fraud claim against you." Sharon turned on her heel and stalked back to her Mercedes. She peeled out of my driveway, kicking up gravel. I watched her go, then immediately called Marcus back. "Sharon Patterson just left my house. She admitted they've sold 23 slips. That's $345,000, Marcus." He whistled low. "That changes things. That's not just a civil matter anymore. That level of fraud could involve criminal charges." "Did she say anything else?" I recounted the conversation. Marcus was silent for a moment, then said, "She's going to lawyer up and try to find some loophole or precedent to claim shared water access." They'll probably argue something about lakefront community standards or public access rights. It's garbage, but they'll try. The important thing is we move fast. I'm escalating this. The cease and desist goes out today, but I'm also going to file an emergency injunction to stop any further sales or use of those slips while we litigate the property rights. How long will that take? The injunction hearing could happen within a week if we're lucky. The actual case could take months. But Zachary, you need to prepare yourself. This is going to get ugly. HOAs can be vicious when their authority is challenged, and Sharon Patterson sounds like she's not going to back down quietly. He had no idea how right he was. By evening, my phone was blowing up. Somehow, Sharon had gotten my cell number and distributed it to every single boat slip buyer. I received angry calls, threatening texts, and voicemails ranging from pleading to outright hostile. People who'd paid $15,000 weren't happy to hear their purchase was illegitimate. One guy named Robert actually showed up at my door at 7:30 that night, angry and looking for answers. He was a big guy, easily 6'3", with the build of someone who worked construction. "Are you Zachary Ellis?" he demanded when I answered the door. "I am, and you are, Robert Chen. I bought slip 12. I've been saving for 3 years to get lake access for my boat. Now Sharon says you're trying to steal it from me. I'm not stealing anything. Sharon sold you access to my private property without my permission. That's not legal." "Bull," Robert said. "She showed us all the documents at the sales meeting. Permits, community access agreements, everything. You're just a rich guy trying to keep the lake to yourself." "Robert, I sympathize with your situation, but Sharon defrauded you. I've owned this property and these water rights for 15 years. My deed predates the entire Waterford Hills development. You need to get your money back from the HOA, not harass me. Sharon said you'd say that. She's calling an emergency community meeting tomorrow night. We're all going to be there, and you're going to explain yourself. I don't owe the HOA or its members any explanations. I'm not part of your community. But if you want to show up with your lawyer and review my deed and property survey, you're welcome to do that during daylight hours with an appointment." Robert jabbed a finger at me. "This isn't over. You can't just screw over 24 families and walk away. Sharon screwed you over, not me. Talk to her about refunds." He left, but the hostility was palpable. I realized this situation was going to get worse before it got better. The next day, Marcus's process server delivered the cease and desist letter to Sharon Patterson's home address. According to the server, she refused to sign for it at first, claiming it was harassment, but eventually accepted it when he explained he'd just leave it on her doorstep otherwise. The letter demanded immediate cessation of all boat slip sales, removal of all dock structures from my property within 30 days, and refunds to all buyers. It also put her on notice that we would be pursuing legal action. That evening, I decided to attend the HOA emergency meeting. I wasn't a member, but it was technically open to community residents, and I wanted to hear what Sharon was telling people. The meeting was held at the Waterford Hills Clubhouse, a fancy building with a pool and tennis courts that the HOA members paid hefty fees to maintain. When I walked in at 7, the place was packed. Easily 100 people filled the chairs and lined the walls. The energy was hostile. Conversation stopped as people noticed me enter. Sharon stood at the front with 3 other board members, a satisfied smirk on her face when she saw me. "Well," she announced loudly, "look who decided to join us. Zachary Ellis, the man trying to destroy our community." I didn't take the bait. I found a spot along the back wall and crossed my arms, waiting. Sharon held up the cease and desist letter. "As I'm sure you've all heard, Mr. Ellis has threatened legal action over our boat slip development. He claims to own the water where our docks are installed. Because I do, I called out. Show them your title search, Sharon. Oh wait, you never did one, did you? Her face reddened. The HOA consulted with legal counsel before beginning this project. We operated in good faith based on standard lakefront community precedents. What's the name of your attorney? I asked. Because my attorney seems to think you're committing fraud. A man in his 40s stood up from the front row. He wore an expensive suit and had the polished look of someone who spent a lot of time in courtrooms. I'm David Brennan, counsel for the Waterford Hills HOA. Mr. Ellis, your claims are based on outdated property designations that don't account for modern community development standards. South Carolina has extensive precedent for shared water access in planned communities, none of which applies here because this isn't HOA property, I shot back. My land predates your development by decades. I have grandfather rights that are explicitly documented in my deed. Your so-called precedents require the HOA to actually own or have legal access to the water in question. That's a matter of interpretation, Brennan said smoothly. Which is why we're prepared to litigate this matter. The HOA has substantial legal resources, and we believe the community's interest in reasonable water access will prevail. A woman stood up, tears streaming down her face. I'm Janet Reeves. My husband and I bought slip 19. We're retired, and we used our anniversary money for this. Are you really going to take this from us? I felt a pang of sympathy, but I kept my voice firm. Mrs. Reeves, I'm sorry for your situation, but Sharon Patterson took your money under false pretenses. She sold you something she didn't own and had no right to sell. That's not my fault. But you have so much water, Janet pleaded. Can't you share? We're not hurting anyone. It's not about sharing. It's about property rights. If I let this slide, I lose my legal claim to my own property. Sharon knew what she was doing was wrong, or she would have contacted me before building docks and selling slips. Sharon stood up, her voice rising. You're hiding behind legal technicalities to be a selfish, greedy property hoarder. This community voted on this project. We funded it through our HOA dues and slip sales. You have no right to destroy what we've built. You built it on my property, I said. That's called trespassing. The fact that you charged people money for it makes it fraud. The fact that you collected $345,000 makes it a serious crime. The room erupted in angry shouts. People were standing, pointing at me, yelling accusations. Someone called me a thief. Another person suggested I should be run out of the county. Sharon made no effort to restore order. In fact, she seemed to be encouraging the mob mentality. David Brennan finally raised his hands. Everyone, please. This matter will be resolved in court. Mr. Ellis has filed for an injunction hearing, which will take place next Tuesday. In the meantime, I advise all slip owners to continue using your access as normal. Don't let intimidation tactics scare you off your legally purchased property rights. They're not legally purchased, I said loudly. And when the judge sees my property deed next Tuesday, you're all going to realize you've been conned. I left before things could escalate further. As I walked to my truck, someone threw a soda can that bounced off my shoulder. Another person keyed my truck's paint as I was pulling away. I got it on my dash cam, but I didn't stop. I just wanted to get home. Marcus called me at 9 that night. I heard the meeting got rough. Understatement. Their lawyer is telling people to keep using the slips. They're going to fight this hard. Let them. I've prepared our evidence package for the injunction hearing. Your deed is ironclad, Zachary. The problem is that Brennan is going to throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. He'll argue community easements, prescriptive rights, public access doctrines, anything to muddy the waters. The goal is to make this expensive and prolonged enough that you give up. I'm not giving up. This is my property. Good. Because I did some research on Sharon Patterson. She's been the HOA president for 8 years. She runs that community like a personal fiefdom. 2 years ago, she tried to force a homeowner to remove a tree he'd planted because it wasn't on the approved landscaping list. When he refused, she fined him $10,000. He ended up selling his house and moving. She's done similar things to at least 4 other families I found records of. So she's a tyrant. That doesn't surprise me. It's more than that. I think the boat slip scheme might not be her first fraudulent project. 3 years ago, the HOA collected special assessments for a new community gazebo. $80,000. The gazebo was built, but it cost $40,000 according to the contractor I spoke to. The other $40,000 vanished into administrative costs. No detailed accounting was ever provided. I sat up straighter. You think she's embezzling? I think she's been using the HOA as a personal piggy bank for years, and nobody has challenged her because she's vicious to anyone who questions her authority. The boat slip scheme might have been a way to generate a lot of cash quickly. If she's skimming from that $345,000, we're talking about a serious criminal enterprise. Should we go to the police? Not yet. We don't have hard evidence of embezzlement, just suspicious circumstances. But I'm going to recommend that we bring in a forensic accountant to review the HOA's books. If Sharon has been stealing, we can use that as leverage. The week leading up to the injunction hearing was hell. Someone spray-painted "selfish jerk" on my fence. My mailbox was knocked over 3 times. I started getting pizza deliveries I never ordered, subscription services charged to my credit card, and someone even called in a false tip to the police that I was running a drug operation, which resulted in a very uncomfortable conversation with a detective who thankfully realized pretty quickly it was a bogus claim. The harassment campaign was coordinated and relentless. Sharon had weaponized the entire HOA community against me. On Tuesday morning, I met Marcus at the Pickens County Courthouse. The injunction hearing was scheduled for 10. Marcus had filed for an emergency temporary restraining order to halt all use of the boat slips pending a full hearing on the property rights issue. David Brennan was there with Sharon and 2 other HOA board members. About 30 slip owners packed the gallery, shooting daggers at me with their eyes. I recognized Robert Chen, Janet Reeves, and the couple I'd first encountered on the dock. Judge Carol Martinez presided. She was in her 60s, with a reputation for being no-nonsense and fair. She reviewed our filings, then looked up over her glasses. "This appears to be a property dispute with a straightforward solution," she said. "Mr. Ellis, your attorney has submitted your deed and property survey. Mrs. Patterson, has the HOA submitted evidence of their right to install structures and sell access to the disputed water?" David Brennan stood. "Your Honor, the HOA operates under the principle of community development in a planned lakefront residential area. While Mr. Ellis's deed predates our community, the modern use of Lake Keowee water access has evolved to reflect shared resources among adjoining property owners." "That's not evidence of legal right," Judge Martinez said. "That's philosophy." "Do you have a deed, easement, or documented permission from Mr. Ellis to use this water?" "No, Your Honor, but we're arguing that explicit permission isn't required under South Carolina's prescriptive easement doctrine and community access standards. Prescriptive easement requires continuous use for 20 years. When were these docks built? 6 weeks ago, Your Honor." Judge Martinez looked at him like he'd grown a second head. "Counselor, you can't claim prescriptive rights to property you've been using for 6 weeks. What else do you have? Brennan shuffled papers. We believe that Mr. Ellis's water rights are overly broad and don't align with modern lakefront development patterns. We're prepared to argue that his claim to 300 feet of water rights is unreasonable and should be modified by the court to allow community access. That's an argument for a full trial, not an injunction hearing. Right now, I need to determine if Mr. Ellis has shown a likelihood of success on the merits of his property claim. Mr. Webb, your client's deed explicitly grants water rights extending 300 feet from shore. Marcus stood. Yes, Your Honor. It's a grandfathered provision from the original 1940s property survey, predating Lake Kiowa's development, and certainly predating the Waterford Hills HOA by decades. Mr. Ellis purchased the property with these rights clearly disclosed and paid a premium for them. And the dock structures are within this 300-foot zone. Yes, Your Honor. The closest is approximately 150 feet from Mr. Ellis's shore. All of the structures are well within his documented water rights. Judge Martinez reviewed the survey documents, then looked at Brennan. Counselor, unless you can show me evidence that Mr. Ellis's deed is invalid or that the HOA has acquired these water rights through some legal mechanism, I'm inclined to grant the injunction. Your Honor, 23 families have purchased these boat slips in good faith. An injunction would cause substantial harm to innocent parties. The harm was caused by someone selling property rights they didn't own, Judge Martinez said sharply. If those families were defrauded, they have recourse against the party who sold them the slips. Mr. Ellis is not responsible for the HOA's failure to verify property rights before developing this project. She signed an order. Effective immediately, all use of the boat slip structures installed on Mr. Ellis's property is prohibited. The HOA is ordered to cease any further sales or leasing of access to these structures. All boats currently moored must be removed within 72 hours. The HOA is ordered to remove all dock structures within 45 days. A full hearing on property rights and damages will be scheduled within 60 days. This court also notes that the HOA may be subject to fraud claims from the slip purchasers. That's separate from this matter, but I'm putting it on the record. The gallery erupted. People were shouting, crying, swearing. Sharon's face was purple with rage. David Brennan tried to maintain composure as he said, Your Honor, we request a stay pending appeal. Denied. The property rights here are clear. Remove the structures and refund the buyers. Next case. Marcus and I walked out of the courthouse to find a crowd of angry HOA members waiting. They shouted insults and accusations as we hurried to Marcus's car. Someone threw a full coffee cup that splashed across the windshield. Marcus called the police, and we waited in the locked car until 2 officers dispersed the crowd. That went as well as we could have hoped, Marcus said as we finally drove away. But this isn't over. They're going to appeal, and Sharon is going to make your life miserable in the meantime. He was right. That afternoon, I returned home to find that someone had cut down 4 mature oak trees on my property. They were right near the road, clearly visible and clearly intentional. The cuts were fresh, the wood still oozing sap. I called the police and filed a report. The responding officer, a young guy named Tyler Morrison, surveyed the damage and whistled. That's easily $20,000 in damages, maybe more. These were heritage oaks. You have any idea who did it? I've been in a legal fight with the Waterford Hills HOA. It's been escalating. Officer Morrison wrote notes. We'll investigate, but without witnesses or camera footage, it's going to be hard to prove who did it. I showed him the dashcam footage from the courthouse parking lot where several HOA members, including Robert Chen, had made threatening comments. That guy there said he was going to make me pay. 2 hours later, my trees are cut down. That's circumstantial, but it's something. We'll bring him in for questioning. The next day, the harassment escalated further. I woke up to find my dock had been vandalized. Someone had spray-painted obscenities across the wood and slashed the cushions on my boat. They'd also punctured the pontoons, causing it to sit low in the water. The damage was extensive and personal. I called Officer Morrison again. This time he came with a detective named Sandra Hughes. She was in her 40s, sharp-eyed and thorough. "Mr. Ellis, this has gone beyond vandalism. We're looking at stalking, harassment, and potentially organized criminal activity. Have you received any direct threats?" I showed her my phone, scrolling through hundreds of threatening texts and voicemails. These are from boat slip buyers. Some are just angry, but some are explicitly threatening violence. Detective Hughes reviewed the messages, her expression darkening. "This is serious. We're going to need to identify the sources of these threats. I'm also going to recommend you install comprehensive security cameras around your property and consider a restraining order against the HOA leadership." Can you do that? Get a restraining order against an organization, against specific individuals who are leading the harassment campaign. Sharon Patterson, for one. If we can prove she's encouraging this behavior, we can charge her with conspiracy and get a court order keeping her away from you and your property. Over the next week, I installed cameras everywhere. My insurance company sent an adjuster who assessed the damages to my trees, dock, and boat at just over $37,000. I filed a civil suit against the HOA for damages, harassment, and trespassing. Meanwhile, Marcus's forensic accountant finished a preliminary review of the HOA's publicly available financial records. What she found was damning. Over the past 5 years, Sharon Patterson had funneled approximately $215,000 from HOA accounts into various consulting fees and administrative costs that had no documentation. The boat slip money was being deposited into a separate account that Sharon controlled personally, rather than the HOA's main operating account. "This is embezzlement," Marcus told me. "She's been stealing from the HOA for years. The boat slip scheme was just her most brazen attempt yet." That $345,000 was probably going to disappear into offshore accounts or get hidden in fake invoices. "We need to go to the police with this." Already done. I sent everything to Detective Hughes this morning. She's opening a fraud investigation. Detective Hughes moved fast. 2 days later, she executed a search warrant on Sharon Patterson's home and the HOA offices. They seized financial records, computers, and Sharon's personal banking information. The forensic analysis took 3 weeks, but when the results came back, they painted a picture of systematic theft. Sharon had been embezzling money since she became HOA president. It started small with inflated expense reports and fake vendor invoices. Over the years, it escalated. She'd created shell companies that billed the HOA for services never rendered. She'd approved contracts with kickback arrangements where vendors would overcharge and give her a cut. The boat slip scheme was meant to be her biggest score yet. Of the $345,000 collected, she'd already transferred $120,000 to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. The district attorney, a woman named Patricia Langford, personally took the case. This wasn't just HOA drama anymore. This was a major white-collar crime. Sharon Patterson was arrested on a Tuesday morning. Detective Hughes and 2 other officers showed up at her house at 6 in the morning with an arrest warrant. She was charged with embezzlement, fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. The charges carried a potential sentence of 25 years. The arrest made the local news. I watched the footage of Sharon being led out of her house in handcuffs, her perfectly styled hair disheveled, her face streaked with angry tears. She screamed at the cameras that she was being persecuted, that this was all Zachary Ellis's fault, that the charges were fabricated. David Brennan, the HOA attorney, immediately resigned from representing the association. The remaining board members called an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove Sharon as president. They issued a public apology to me and to all the boat slip buyers, acknowledging that Sharon had operated without proper authorization and that the HOA would work to make things right. The new HOA president, a reasonable woman named Linda Martinez, called me directly. "Mr. Ellis, on behalf of the Waterford Hills community, I want to apologize for everything you've been through. Sharon operated without board oversight on the boat slip project. We had no idea she was using HOA funds for personal gain. We're cooperating fully with law enforcement and are prepared to settle our dispute with you." "What about the boat slip buyers?" I asked. "Those people lost a lot of money. We're setting up a restitution fund. The HOA will refund every buyer the full $15,000 they paid. It's going to drain our reserves and require a special assessment, but it's the right thing to do. We'll also remove all the dock structures at our expense." "I appreciate that, Linda. I never wanted a war with the community. I just wanted my property rights respected." "Understood. We'll have the docks removed within 2 weeks. Our attorney will contact yours to formalize the settlement." True to her word, Linda had a professional marine construction company remove all the dock structures within 10 days. The HOA sent a check for $37,000 to cover my damages. Every boat slip buyer received a full refund. Sharon Patterson's criminal case moved through the system. Her attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but Patricia Langford wasn't interested in going easy. The evidence was overwhelming. Sharon had stolen more than $400,000 from the HOA over 5 years when you included all her various schemes. The boat slip fraud alone involved 23 victims who'd been sold property rights that didn't exist. In September, 5 months after her arrest, Sharon pleaded guilty to all charges in exchange for a recommended sentence of 15 years. The judge accepted the plea. At sentencing, Sharon tried to give a tearful statement about how she'd made mistakes and let power corrupt her, but the judge cut her off. "Mrs. Patterson, you didn't make mistakes. You systematically defrauded people who trusted you with their community and their money. You sold property you didn't own, pocketed hundreds of thousands of dollars, and when you were caught, you orchestrated a harassment campaign that included destruction of property and threats of violence. You showed no remorse until you were facing consequences. 15 years is more than fair." Sharon was led away crying. I felt no satisfaction watching it. The whole situation was a mess that never should have happened. The civil suits took longer to resolve. Several boat slip buyers sued the HOA for negligence and fraud. I was called as a witness in 3 separate cases. Each time, I testified that the buyers were innocent victims of Sharon's scheme and that they deserved full restitution. The HOA settled each case, paying out additional damages beyond the initial refunds. Robert Chen, the big guy who'd confronted me at my door, actually came by in October to apologize. He brought his wife and daughter with him. "Mr. Ellis, I owe you a huge apology," he said, looking genuinely ashamed. "I believed Sharon when she said you were just being difficult. I said some terrible things to you. My wife and I participated in some of the protest planning. We didn't do any of the vandalism, but we encouraged people to make your life hard. That was wrong. I appreciate you saying that, I said. Sharon was convincing. She fooled a lot of people. We got our money back from the HOA, plus another $5,000 in damages. We're putting it toward a boat of our own now, something we can actually afford to dock properly. He paused. Some of the folks who did vandalize your property are facing charges. I testified about who was planning what. I thought you should know. 3 people were ultimately charged with destruction of property related to cutting down my trees and vandalizing my boat. They pleaded guilty and paid restitution. The spray painting and mailbox incidents were never solved, but the serious damages were addressed. By the following spring, almost a year after I'd first discovered the boat slip scheme, life had finally returned to normal. The Waterford Hills HOA had new leadership and new bylaws requiring independent oversight of all financial transactions. They'd hired a property management company to handle day-to-day operations to prevent any one person from having Sharon's level of unchecked control. I still own my property and my water rights. My dock was repaired and looks better than ever. I planted new oak trees to replace the ones that were cut down. They'll take decades to reach the size of the originals, but they'll get there. On a sunny morning in May, I was back on my dock with my coffee, watching the sunrise paint Lake Kiowa in beautiful colors. A pontoon boat cruised by, the occupants waving cheerfully. I waved back. The lake was peaceful again. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Patterson's sentencing was upheld on appeal. She's officially serving the full 15 years. Case closed, I typed back. Thanks for everything. Couldn't have done it without you. I set the phone down and breathed in the morning air. The whole ordeal had been exhausting, infuriating, and expensive despite the settlements. But it proved something important. Property rights matter. The law matters. And no HOA president, no matter how powerful they think they are in their little fiefdom, is above the law. Sharon Patterson had spent years building a reputation as an untouchable force in Waterford Hills. She'd bullied homeowners, embezzled money, and genuinely believed she could sell property she didn't own without consequences. Her downfall was complete. She lost everything: her position, her reputation, her freedom, and every dollar she'd stolen. The courts had ordered full restitution, which meant her house, cars, and assets were seized and sold to pay back the HOA and the victims of her schemes. The boat slip buyers, people like Robert Chen and Janet Reeves, were made whole financially. Many of them sent me apology notes or stopped by to say they were sorry for believing Sharon's lies. I didn't hold grudges. They'd been victims too. The broader Waterford Hills community learned a hard lesson about accountability and oversight. At their annual meeting in June, the members voted to implement comprehensive reforms. Board members would now serve term limits. Financial audits would be conducted quarterly by independent firms. Any capital project over $10,000 would require a vote of the full membership, not just board approval. It was the kind of governance that should have been in place all along. Linda Martinez, the new HOA president, turned out to be excellent. She was transparent, communicative, and actually cared about serving the community rather than ruling it. She sent me a Christmas card that year with a handwritten note thanking me for exposing Sharon's crimes. "You saved our community from years more of theft and abuse," she wrote. "We're stronger now because of what happened." I framed that card and hung it in my office next to my property deed. It was a reminder that doing the right thing, even when it's hard and everyone hates you for it, eventually leads to justice. As I finished my coffee that May morning and watched boats cruise across Lake Kiowa, I thought about how close I'd come to just letting it go. When I first saw that couple on the unauthorized dock, I could have ignored it. I could have said it wasn't worth the hassle. Sharon Patterson had counted on people like me being too tired or too intimidated to fight back. But property rights aren't just technical legalities. They're the foundation of ownership and freedom. If I'd let Sharon steal my water rights, it would have set a precedent that anyone with enough nerve and organizational backing could take what wasn't theirs. The 23 boat slip buyers would have continued thinking they'd made legitimate purchases. Sharon would have gotten away with hundreds of thousands in embezzlement. The HOA would have continued operating as Sharon's personal kingdom. Instead, the truth came out. Justice was served. A criminal went to prison. Victims were compensated. And a community learned to demand better from its leaders. I stood up from my chair and walked to the end of my dock. The water was clear and calm. My property line extended 300 feet out, just as it had for 80 years. Nobody was building unauthorized structures. Nobody was selling access that wasn't theirs to sell. It was just my private water on my private property, exactly as it should be. A fish jumped near the shoreline, sending ripples across the surface. I smiled and headed back to the house. I had work to do. My landscaping company had sent over plans for the new trees, and I wanted to review them before the planting crew arrived next week. Life was good again. The nightmare with the HOA was over. Sharon Patterson was in prison where she belonged. The community was healing and reforming. And I had my morning coffee spot back without drama or conflict. Sometimes standing up for what's right means enduring harassment, vandalism, and being the most hated person in a community for a while. But in the end, truth and law prevail over fraud and intimidation. Sharon Patterson learned that the hard way. The Waterford Hills HOA learned that blind trust in leadership is dangerous. And I learned that property rights are worth defending, no matter how much easier it might be to just let things slide. As I reviewed the landscaping plans at my kitchen table, I heard another boat cruise by outside. No unauthorized docking, no trespassing. Just neighbors enjoying the lake in their own spaces, respecting boundaries, living peacefully. That's how it was supposed to be. That's how it was now. And that's how it would stay, because I'd fought for it when it mattered most. The whole experience changed how I viewed community governance. I started attending more county planning meetings, not because I wanted to be involved in politics, but because I realized how important it was to have informed citizens watching what officials and organizations were doing with power and money. I even gave a talk at a local property owners association about the importance of financial oversight and accountability in HOAs. People from other neighborhoods reached out with their own HOA horror stories. Not embezzlement exactly, but abuses of power, arbitrary enforcement of rules, boards that operated in secret without member input. I referred them to Marcus and to advocacy groups that specialized in HOA reform. The problems were more widespread than I'd realized. Sharon Patterson wasn't unique. She was just one example of what happens when someone gets a little authority and zero oversight. HOAs across the country had similar issues. Leaders who treated positions of service as positions of power, boards that made decisions benefiting themselves rather than the community, and members who stayed silent because challenging authority seemed too hard. But change was possible. Waterford Hills proved that. One person standing up and saying, "No, this is wrong," could trigger a cascade of accountability. My refusal to let Sharon sell my water rights exposed her entire criminal enterprise. If I'd backed down, she'd still be president today, still stealing money, still bullying homeowners who dared to question her. The legal bills had been significant, even with the settlement covering my direct damages. Marcus estimated I'd spent $40,000 of my own money on attorney's fees, forensic accountants, and expert witnesses. But it was worth every penny. Some things are more valuable than money. Principle, justice, the rule of law. I thought about the couple I'd first met on the dock that morning a year ago. They'd gotten their $15,000 back, plus damages. They'd bought a slip at a legitimate marina an hour away. I'd seen them a few times since, always friendly now, always apologetic about the initial hostility. They understood they'd been pawns in Sharon's game. Janet Reeves, the crying woman from the emergency meeting, sent me a fruit basket with a note saying she hoped I could forgive her for believing Sharon's lies. I called her and told her there was nothing to forgive. She'd invested anniversary money into something Sharon had told her was legitimate. The betrayal she felt when the truth came out was punishment enough. Most of the boat slip buyers moved on with their lives. A few harbored lingering resentment toward me, believing I should have just shared the water. But they were in the minority. Most people, once they understood the facts and saw Sharon arrested for massive fraud, recognized that I'd been right to defend my property. The Waterford Hills community actually grew closer after the scandal. Shared trauma sometimes does that. They'd all been victimized by someone they'd trusted. Working together to reform the HOA, support the fraud victims, and rebuild trust created bonds that hadn't existed before. Linda Martinez told me at a chance meeting at the grocery store that community meeting attendance had tripled. People were engaged now, asking questions, demanding transparency. That was healthy. As for me, I went back to the quiet life I'd always wanted. My mornings on the dock with coffee and sunrises. My days working remotely for the software company I consulted with. My evenings fishing or reading on the porch. The drama was over. The peace was restored. But I kept the security cameras. I kept the documentation of everything that had happened. I kept Marcus Webb on speed dial. Because I'd learned that even when you think you're just living your life on your own property, minding your own business, someone might come along and try to take what's yours. And when that happens, you have to be ready to fight back with evidence, lawyers, and unwavering determination. Sharon Patterson made a lot of mistakes, but her biggest was underestimating a quiet property owner who valued principle over popularity. She thought I'd be too intimidated by community pressure to stand firm. She thought her position as HOA president gave her the right to do whatever she wanted. She thought she could bully, threaten, and harass her way to victory. She was wrong on all counts. And now she had 15 years in federal prison to think about where she went wrong. I didn't take pleasure in her suffering, but I didn't feel guilty about it either. She'd made her choices. She'd committed crimes. She'd hurt a lot of people. Justice demanded consequences. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in orange and purple. I walked back out to my dock and sat in my chair, watching the colors reflect off Lake Keowee. A year ago, this view had included 8 illegal dock structures selling access to my water. Tonight, it was just pristine shoreline, exactly as it should be. My phone buzzed one more time. A text from Linda Martinez. The new HOA bylaws passed unanimously at tonight's meeting. Full financial transparency and member oversight. Thank you again for everything. I smiled and typed back, "Congratulations, that's how communities should operate." I set the phone down and breathed in the evening air. The nightmare was truly over. The victory was complete. Property rights had been defended. Criminals had been punished. Victims had been compensated. A community had been reformed. And I had my dock, my water, my property, and my peace back. That's all I'd ever wanted. That's all I'd fought for. And that's what I'd won. The legal documents from the case sat in a file cabinet in my office, a complete record of everything that had happened. The property deed with its crystal-clear water rights, the survey showing my boundaries, the photographs of the illegal docks, the financial forensics exposing Sharon's embezzlement, the court orders granting injunctions and awarding damages, the criminal judgment sending her to prison. It was a story of property rights versus fraud, of individual citizens versus corrupt leadership, of truth versus lies. And in the end, as it should be in a nation of laws, the truth had won. I sat on that dock until the stars came out, grateful for the legal system that had vindicated my rights, grateful for the attorney who had fought beside me, grateful for the community members who had eventually seen through Sharon's deceptions, and grateful for the peace that came from knowing I'd done the right thing even when it was hard. Tomorrow would bring another sunrise, another cup of coffee, another quiet morning on my private dock overlooking my private water. No drama, no conflict, no HOA trying to steal what was mine, just the way it should be, just the way it would stay. Because some things are worth fighting for, no matter the cost.